Our story begins in the twilight of an older world, a time when the veil between seen and unseen was thin as morning mist. In the western lands of the Celts, where green hills folded into gray sea cliffs and rivers wound like silver ribbons, there stood a grove so ancient that no living soul could recall its first dawn. At its heart grew a single oak, vast, solemn, and older than the language of kings. The Druids called it Door, the gateway tree. Its name lived in their tongues as both door and oak, for they believed the tree stood at the threshold between the human realm and the other world. The oak's roots were said to reach the underworld of ancestors, and its crown brushed the stars, where spirits of air and light resided. By day, the grove shimmered with soft green light, filtered through thousands of leaves that murmured with the breeze. By night, it became a cathedral of silence, the air filled with the scent of earth, the faint drip of dew from branch to moss. It was here that the druid named Ira came to listen. She was not a seer in the manner of the poets or the wandering prophets. Kara, her gift was listening not to people, but to trees, stones, rivers, and stars. In those years, the druids kept the old ways alive. They read omens in the flights of ravens and the ripples of water stirred by the wind, and in a faint spiral of smoke rising from sacred fires. But it was through the whisper of leaves that Ira sought her answers. She would walk barefoot to the grove, as all druids did, for no iron could cross that sacred threshold. The soles of her feet would sink into cool moss, each step a prayer to the living earth beneath. Around her waist, she wore a belt of woven rushes. Hanging from it were small charms, a carved hazel stick for wisdom, a sprig of rowan for protection, and a sliver of yew to remind her of mortality and rebirth. At the base of the oak, she would kneel, her palms resting on the bark, rough yet warm to the touch. There, she would set her offerings, a bowl of milk for the spirits of fertility, a piece of honeycomb for the gods of summer, and 3 grains of barley for the ancestors who watched from the shadowed realm. The Celts believed such offerings maintained balance, an oath between human and land. To take from the earth without gratitude was to invite silence, and silence was the loss of magic. Ira would close her eyes and listen. The wind through the oak's branches carried 1,000 sounds, the sigh of barks stretching, the faint flutter of leaves, the soft patter of dew falling onto moss. To most, it was only noise, but to her, it was speech. In the rustling patterns, she read the rhythms of weather and the signs of fortune. A soft, steady breeze meant the harvest would be kind. A sudden gust foretold change, the movement of kings, perhaps, or the death of one season and the birth of another. The Druids taught that each tree spoke its own dialect of the divine language. The birch whispered of beginnings, the willow of dreams, the yew of endings. But the oak spoke of endurance, of truth that did not bend with time. When the wind changed direction, Ira opened her eyes. The moon was rising, a thin crescent that shimmered through a veil of clouds. It was the night of Alban Elft, the balance of autumn, when day and night shared equal reign. On such nights, druids performed divinations for the turning of the year, asking what the coming darkness would bring. Ira reached into her pouch and drew out a handful of small wooden staves, each etched with marks of the ogham. The ogham was their sacred alphabet, lines and notches carved upon wood or stone, each representing a sound, a tree, a concept of the natural world. One line to the right of the stem meant Beeth, the birch, new beginnings. 3 lines to the left meant Ten, the holly, protection and conflict. 5 lines across meant Door, the oak itself, the threshold, strength and truth. She cast the staves gently onto a square of white cloth and let them fall where they would. The pattern they formed would tell her what was to come. The firelight from her small beeswax candle flickered across their surfaces, gleaming on the carved lines, making them seem to move and shift. As she studied them, a sound rose, a soft murmur from the oak above her. It was not mere wind. It was the sound of breath through wood, slow, rhythmic, as if the tree itself inhaled and exhaled the night. The Celts believed that such sounds were messages from the Ease, she, the Shining Ones, spirits of the other world who lived within hollow hills and ancient trees. Ira listened closely. The oak's whisper deepened, like the tide drawing inward, pulling her awareness with it. The leaves rustled in steady cadence, forming patterns she had been trained to understand. A storm in the east, a journey to come, the birth of something new beneath the waning moon. And then, softer still, came a phrase she could not translate, but she felt its meaning in her bones. The roots, remember. She breathed in deeply. The scent of damp earth filled her senses, grounding her in stillness. She had heard that phrase only once before in the teachings of her elders. When the land forgets its roots, the spirit of the world grows restless. As she pondered this, an owl called from somewhere high above, its note deep and clear. To the Celts, the owl was a messenger from the underworld, a guide between night and knowledge. Ira bowed her head in acknowledgement. The grove around her shimmered faintly, as though lit from within. The mist had gathered at the tree's base, curling in tendrils of silver and white. In that stillness, she felt the presence of countless generations, druids, kings, healers, all who had once knelt before this same tree, asking for wisdom, for omens, for the quiet voice of truth. The oak's branches swayed again, slow and solemn. The leaves seemed to hum, not words, but tones. The same sound that once guided seers and dreamers through centuries of faith. And as Ira listened, her breath slowed, her heartbeat softened. The world around her dissolved into sound, and that sound became silence, the pure silence of understanding. The night deepened. The crescent moon climbed higher, thin as a silver sickle against a sky veiled in clouds. Its faint light spilled through the oak's branches, scattering in patches upon the ground, pools of ghostly white that shifted with the breeze. Ira's eyes were half closed, her mind balanced between waking and the realm of vision. The Druids called the state the Imbus Forest Nigh, the illumination that rises within. It was not dream nor waking sight, but something that lived between the two, a calm widening of perception. Around her, the grove held its breath. The soft hum of insects stilled. The owl's wings whispered once more through the darkness, then vanished into silence. Even the mist seemed to pause, and in that silence, Ira saw the great oak before her was no longer still. Spark shimmered faintly, its surface shifting like water. Beneath its skin moved a slow pulse of light green, gold, then deep amber, as though the lifeblood of centuries glowed within. The leaves, touched by the moon, seemed to shimmer with runes invisible to ordinary eyes. Each leaf carried a mark, faint ogham strokes traced by wind, by memory, by the weight of ritual long forgotten. She saw Beeth, Louise, Naon, and Dor, birch, rowan, ash, and oak, the 4 trees of protection, each a guardian of a different realm. The Celts believed that every season held its own door into the unseen. Cape Sand, when the year turned dark, spirits crossed freely. At Bedtime, the fire festival of light, the worlds met again in celebration of life renewed. Its night's vision, born at the balance of Alban Elft, belonged to both half-light, half-shadow, and so the veil thinned in perfect harmony. Ira felt the air shift. A low murmur rippled through the branches above her, deep and layered, like distant chanting. The sound grew clearer until she recognized the rhythm, the pattern of an old druidic hymn once sung at the solstice fires. Root to stone, leaf to star, life in circle, near and far, breath of oak and flame of sky, speak the truth that does not die. The hymn was a prayer to the living forces earth, its air, fire, and water, the elements that bound all things. The Druids taught that divination was not a calling of fate, but a conversation with these elements, each revealing a facet of truth through its language. Ira breathed with the rhythm of the chant. Her pulse slowed to match it. Beneath her palms, she felt the oak's bark grow warm. The scent of resin deepened in the air. Then, from the shadowed base of the tree, a soft light rose. Not fire, but something cooler, gentler, as though moonlight had taken form. Within it appeared shapes, faint outlines of animals drawn from the mist, a stag with antlers that branched like lightning, a wren fluttering at his hooves, a salmon that shimmered as if made of water and memory. Each was sacred to the druids, each a bearer of meaning. The stag, lord of the forest, symbolized sovereignty and the turning of time. His appearance meant the land itself was watching. The wren, smallest of birds, was the keeper of secrets, the king of all birds, crowned not by size, but by cleverness. For a legend told how he flew higher than any other by hiding beneath the eagle's wing, and the salmon was wisdom incarnate, its silver scales said to hold the knowledge of the world's rivers, the memory of every beginning. They moved in a slow circle beneath the oak, their outlines woven from mist and starlight. The stag lowered his head toward Ira, and in that gesture she felt both greeting and command. "The land remembers," whispered the oak above her, its voice deep and endless as the earth itself. Test, but memory fades when not spoken. Ira bowed her head. She understood then. Her divination was not for her alone. The omens spoke of duty, to remember, to teach, to guard the words that time sought to erase. In the ancient Celtic world, diviners were not prophets for kings, but keepers of balance. Allah, they read, not the whims of destiny, but the health of harmony between humankind and the natural world, between the living and the dead. If that balance faltered, so too with the strength of the land. The stag circled once more and lifted his gaze toward the north, where storm clouds were gathering at the edge of the horizon. His form flickered, then dissolved into the dark. The wren followed, its tiny body a brief spark of gold before vanishing. The salmon sank into shadow and was gone. The grove was still again, though the air remained charged with quiet power. The oak's branches creaked softly, as if adjusting to the weight of new knowledge. Ira drew a deep breath. The mist stirred around her knees, rising higher now, curling through the oak's roots like smoke. Within it, faint lines of ogham shimmered once again, marks not carved by hand, but written in air, their meaning fleeting yet eternal. She read what she could: truth, durance, remembrance. Her candle had nearly burned to nothing. Its last thread of flame wavered, then steadied, the light bending toward the oak's trunk, as though drawn to it. The forest exhaled. Soft wind drifted through the clearing, carrying with it the scent of oak leaves, wild honey, and the faint sweetness of crushed fern. The sound it made through the branches was no longer random. It was a tone, low and sonorous, vibrating through the air like the echo of a distant harp string. The druids once used harps carved from oak wood during divination rites, believing that their strings could call the spirits of wind and river. The sound resonated with the same pattern that guided the stars' harmonia mundi, the harmony of the world. Ira listened as the oak's tone deepened, harmonizing with her own heartbeat. The sound filled her body like slow-moving light. For a moment, she could feel the roots beneath her spread through the soil, touching stones and streams and the ancient bones of the earth. And in that stillness, she understood the message in full. The oak spoke not of fortune or fate, but of continuance, the quiet strength that endured when words and kingdoms faded. Its divination was not for glory, but for remembrance, to tend the earth, to honor the old ways, to listen when the world grows loud. When the wind finally stilled, Ira opened her eyes. The mist was gone. The grove lay quiet beneath the stars. Her candle's flame had gone out, leaving only the silver glow of moonlight scattered across the moss. The oak stood, unmoving now, its presence vast yet peaceful. The ogham marks upon its bark had vanished, yet the sense of them remained a silent knowing that could not be erased. Ira gathered her staves, folded the white cloth, and pressed her hand once more to the oak's trunk. The bark was cool again, but within its silence, she could still feel the faint echo of words that had no sound. The roots remember. She bowed deeply, whispering the traditional druidic farewell between root and star. I will keep the balance. Then she rose, her bare feet whispering through the moss as she turned toward the forest path. Behind her, the oak sighed, a long, low exhalation that seemed almost content. The leaves rustled gently, as if bidding her rest. And in the distance, faint and far away, thunder rolled softly beyond the hills. The first breath of dawn crept softly through the forest, pale and silver. A fine mist still clung to the roots of trees, curling over the moss in slow, delicate waves. Dew glistened on every leaf, each droplet a tiny mirror reflecting the birth of morning. The air was cool but gentle, filled with the scent of wet bark and the faint sweetness of crushed grass. The storm that had rumbled on the horizon never came. Its echo had dissolved into a calm beyond sound. The oak now stood still and proud, its branches spread wide, holding the quiet as though cradling the world itself. Ira returned to the grove before sunrise. She had not slept, but her body felt light, her spirit clear as running water. There was purpose in her step, a calm certainty born of the night's vision. In the ways of the druids, visions were not ends in themselves, but beginnings. Each carried a responsibility to translate what was seen into harmony within the world. She carried with her a clay vessel filled with clear water drawn from the sacred spring near the village. Such wells were believed to be portals to the other world, places where truth rose from the earth like breath. The Celts called them Tober Niofa, holy wells, and left offerings there of silver, wool, or flowers to honor the spirits who dwelled beneath. When Ira reached the oak, she knelt once more before it and placed the vessel at its roots. The rising light of dawn caught in the water's surface, painting it in soft hues of pink and gold. She took a sprig of oak leaves and dipped it into the bowl, then lifted the dripping leaves toward the east, whispering, "Son of the first light, renewed the covenant. May the land remember through me." Her voice was low, a melody almost lost to the rustle of morning wind. The ritual was not a prayer, but a dialogue, an exchange of acknowledgement between human and nature. The druids believed that seeing was only one part of divination. To speak what was seen aloud sealed it into the living world, ensuring that knowledge did not drift back into silence. For wisdom unspoken was considered a broken thread, and the balance of things depended upon every thread being tended. Ira gazed into the bowl of water. The reflection trembled with the faint movement of air, but within it, shapes began to emerge. The practice was known as scrying, an art as old as the ogham itself. Some used crystals, others pools or mirrors, but water was the most sacred medium, for it belonged to all four elements, fluid as air, shaped by earth, moved by fire, and ever-changing in spirit. At first, she saw only the faint shimmer of sky. Then, the reflection deepened, and in its surface appeared fragments of the vision she had witnessed in the night. The stag, proud and silent. The wren, tiny but radiant with song. The salmon, still gliding through invisible rivers of memory. Yet now, there was a fourth image, faint, almost hidden, a sapling, its leaves small and tender, growing from the shadow of the great oak's roots. Ira's breath caught softly. She understood. The oak's message had not been of the past alone, but of continuity, the need to plant, to teach, to pass onward what might otherwise fade. The Celts believed that to plant an oak was to pledge a lifetime of faith. For the tree grew slowly, its strength revealed only 2 generations yet unborn. The druids marked the planting of every oak with ceremony, a small circle of stones laid around its roots. a libation of milk poured to feed the unseen spirits, and a spoken vow that the planters would care for it until it no longer needed them. Ira dipped her fingers into the bowl and let the cool water run over her hands. Then she poured a small measure at the base of the oak and whispered, "From root to root, the memory flows. From leaf to leaf, the knowing grows." She rose, brushing dew from her knees. The first rays of sunlight pierced the canopy above, striking through the mist in slender beams. Dust motes danced in the light, slow and weightless, as though time itself had softened. The grove awakened around her. A wren sang somewhere among the branches, a bright, trilling note that shimmered like laughter. A hare darted across the moss, its fur slick with dew, pausing briefly to look back before vanishing into the ferns. Every sound, every movement carried harmony. The night's mysteries had settled into stillness, and the stillness had become peace. Ira gathered her ritual things, the ogham staves, the small white cloth, the empty candle cup, yet she left the offering bowl of milk and honey at the oak's roots, as tradition required. In Celtic belief, offerings were not taken back. What was given to the spirits remained theirs. As she prepared to leave, her gaze fell once more upon the oak's trunk. In the new sunlight, the bark's rough patterns seemed to form faint shapes, vertical strokes and cross lines, like the marks of ogham. She traced them lightly with her fingers. There, half hidden by moss, was the symbol of door, the oak's own letter. It meant not just tree, but door, the threshold, the bridge between worlds. Ira smiled softly. It was a fitting farewell. Before stepping from the grove, she turned eastward again and recited the traditional blessing of parting, used by druids when leaving sacred ground. May the winds carry my promise. May the water guard my way. May the fire of spirit never fade, and may the earth remember my name. She bowed low, touching the earth with her fingertips, and then she was gone, her figure swallowed by the folds of the forest. For a while, the grove remained utterly still. Then, as the sun rose higher, light spread across the clearing, setting the oak's leaves aglow. The bowl of water at its base caught the light, turning to gold. And if one had stood there and listened very closely, they might have heard faint, nearly lost the whisper of leaves moving in a slow, measured rhythm. A sound that was not mere wind, but breath, the oak's ancient exhale, answering the vow. In that whisper lived the memory of all who had ever come to listen, of Ira and her elders, of nameless druids and quiet kings, of all who sought harmony beneath its boughs. For though centuries pass and names fade into soil, the oak remains, still speaking the same truth, that wisdom does not vanish, it changes shape. That divination is not prophecy, but presence. That every whisper of leaf and ripple of water carries a message, not of the future, but of belonging. The grove faded back into stillness. Mist dissolved into sunlight. And somewhere, far beneath the surface of the earth, roots intertwined, old with new, memory with promise. The land remembered, and the oak dreamed on. Our story tonight begins on a lonely hill, where the wind moves like breath through the grass, and the earth still remembers the weight of ancient feet. Long before towers were built or bells were rung, there stood here a circle of stones, tall, gray, and unmoving, yet alive in their own quiet way. They had watched the centuries pass like clouds, their shadows shifting across the land in slow, patient rhythm. It was said that when the moon rose full, the stones spoke, not in words, but in light, in the way their long shadows stretched and turned, tracing silent runes across the earth. And on such nights, a woman came to listen. Her name was On, meaning poetic inspiration in the old tongue. Those who lived in the valleys below called her the Stone Circle Seer, for she alone could read the language of moonlight. She was neither priestess nor queen, yet both in her stillness, a keeper of what was once known and what might still be found. Ki Uwan climbed the hill slowly, her cloak brushing against the wild thyme and heather. She carried a small pouch tied with cord. Within it, 12 river pebbles, smooth and round, each marked with a carved symbol. She had gathered them from the stream, said to rise beneath the stones themselves, for water was sacred to those who listened. The Celts believed that water carried memory, that every drop retained the voice of what it once touched. When she reached the top, she paused to look at the sky. The sun had just slipped beyond the horizon, leaving behind a faint blush of crimson that melted into indigo. One by one, the stars began to appear, delicate and tremulous, like the eyes of old gods peering through a veil. At the center of the hilltop, the stones waited. There were 19 of them, rough and lichen-covered, but their arrangement was not random. Each stood in line with a celestial path, one with a midwinter sunrise, another with midsummer's full moon. The ancients had raised them with uncanny precision, aligning earth to sky in a geometry that spoke of reverence and patience. Orn walked the perimeter in silence, her hand trailing lightly over the nearest monolith. The stone was cool beneath her fingers, of course, with time. As she moved, she whispered the names of the months, marking a circle as her forebears had done. Simonios, Demonios, Riveros. Her voice was soft, barely more than a hum, the syllables rising and falling with the rhythm of her breath. When she reached the center, she knelt upon a flat rock worn smooth by centuries of use. From her pouch, she drew the 12 pebbles and placed them before her in a crescent. Each bore a mark, not letters, but sigils of her own making, inspired by the ogham, the ancient script of the Celts. One represented oak, one mistletoe, another the moon's cycle itself. Quond closed her eyes. The night deepened. Wind brushed softly across the plain, carrying with it the faint scent of peat and salt from the western sea. And then silence. It's a kind of silence that was not emptiness, but fullness, the pause before something begins to speak. Slowly, the moon crested the ridge. It rose enormous and white, luminous enough to cast faint color upon the stones. The first of its light touched the highest pillar, a standing stone veined with quartz, and from there spilled downward in slow radiance. As the moon climbed higher, the shadows of the stones began to move, stretching long across the ground, merging, separating, twisting. Own watched them with half-lidded eyes, her breathing slow and steady. Each tilt of light, each drift of shadow carried meaning, the pattern of fortune written in movement. This was the art of shadow seeing, an ancient form of Celtic divination rarely recorded, for it was meant to be learned through watching, not writing. It was said that those who truly understood the stones could read not the future itself, but the balance of what was to come. Not certainty, but rhythm, the tide of time moving toward harmony or dissonance. On leaned forward. The shadows thickened near her feet, gathering in shapes that flickered like smoke. She drew a shallow breath and began to cast the pebbles. One by one, she let them fall, the small stones clicking softly against the larger ones. Where they landed mattered. How they touched one another mattered more. She noted where each pebble rested, whether it fell within the light, within shadow, or upon the line between. Her hands moved slowly, gracefully, tracing invisible paths between them. Her murmurs were rhythmic, almost musical, a chant of old words learned in fragments from those who had come before. Some of those phrases historians would later find etched faintly on bone or slate, mistaken for poetry, when in truth they were instructions for divination. When the last pebble came to rest, Uan looked up. The moon stood now directly above, casting a perfect ring of silver light around the stones. In that glow, the carvings upon their faces gleamed faintly, spirals, circles, and small notches, thought to mark the sun's turning. Some archaeologists now believe these marks were also used as personal sigils, talismans carved by those who sought favor from the unseen. On rose slowly, her cloak brushing the earth. She began to walk the circle again, counter to the moon's path. With each step, she whispered the name of a stone, as though greeting an old friend. Okay. There was the gate, aligned with the winter solstice, the healer facing the summer sunrise. The listener, whose quartz veins caught moonlight and seemed to glow from within. And at the heart of them all, the witness, the tallest of the circle, beneath which she always ended her ritual. When she reached it, she placed both hands against its cold surface and whispered, "Show what must be seen, hide what must remain." The wind stirred gently, wrapping her words around the stones and carrying them into the dark. And as she stood there, still and silent, the world around her seemed to slow. The stars hung motionless, the grass ceased to sway. Time itself bent softly like a reed in shallow water. Okay. Then, from somewhere beyond the edge of the hill, came the hoot of an owl, low and distant, calling once, twice, then falling silent again. To all, it was a sign, an affirmation that the moment had been received, that the veil between seen and unseen had briefly lifted. She did not speak again. Instead, she stood in the moonlight, eyes half closed, letting the stillness cradle her. But this was how visions came, not as images forced into being, but as whispers rising from silence. The light grew softer, the air colder. The circle shimmered with quiet, otherworldly calm. And there, on the lonely hilltop, the stone circle seer waited between one breath and the next for what the night would reveal. The moon hung higher now, pale and perfect, surrounded by a soft halo of mist. Its light turned the stones to silver and the grass to glass, each blade gleaming faintly with dew. The world below, the hill, the valleys, the distant woods, the small cottages where hearth fires glowed, seemed to fade away. Only the circle remained, floating in stillness, as if time had drawn a curtain around it. Aunt's breath moved in long, unhurried waves, in, out. Her hands rested loosely at her sides. The pouch of pebbles, now empty upon the ground. She did not need to look at them again. Their meaning was already forming in her mind, delicate as frost upon water. The Celts believed that to see clearly, one must not stare directly, but soften the gaze, to look around the thing rather than at it. In their rites, seers often spoke of the she sight, a way of perceiving what lies between worlds. It was never forced. It came when the mind was still, when the heartbeat matched the rhythm of wind and stars. So all one waited. The shadows of the stones had shifted again, curling inward like fingers. They seemed to pulse faintly with light, breathing in tune with her. In their moving shapes, she began to discern patterns, not clear images, but echoes of meaning. A circle within a circle, a spiral turning outward, a line broken, then joined again. Her grandmother had taught her that such signs were not omens of fate, but invitations to balance. Nothing, she had whispered, is entirely good or ill. The stones speak of harmony, not warning, and so the young woman did not fear what she saw. Even when the patterns grew darker, their edges sharp as flint, her gaze drifted to one of the outer stones, the listener, its quartz veins glowing faintly like captured moonlight. It was there she felt a pull, gentle but insistent, like a tide calling her name. She moved toward it slowly, every step soundless in the damp grass. When she reached it, she pressed her palm against the stone's cool face. The surface was rough and damp with condensation, but beneath it, she could feel a faint vibration, not imagined, but real, like the hum of earth itself. She knew this sensation well. It was said that certain stones sang on moonlit nights, their crystalline cores resonating with subtle frequencies, long before science would name such things. On leaned her forehead against the stone. She whispered, "Show me the rhythm beneath shadow." The wind rose in answer, soft at first, then swelling, circling through the stones. Her cloak fluttered gently. Her hair brushed her cheeks. The night seemed to exhale. Hang, from behind her closed eyes, came a flicker of light, faint, then stronger. Not the moon's glow, but something deeper, older. In her mind, she saw water, rippling black water, reflecting starlight. She saw a figure, standing at its edge, cloaked as she was, holding something round in their palm, a pebble. The figure cast the pebble into the water. Ripples spread outward, overlapping, until they formed perfect concentric rings. Each ring shimmered with silver light, 12 in all, the number of her pebbles. As the ripples widened, their reflections touched the moon, and the moon itself seemed to waver, softening into waves of living silver. Owen's breathing slowed further. She knew this vision was not merely dream. It was mirror seeing, another of the old ways, where water reflected more than sky. The Celts once placed bowls of water at their stone altars during ritual nights, watching for how moonlight danced upon the surface. They believed that when the light broke in circles, it revealed cycles of change, harvests, tides, and human fortunes alike. Her mind drifted deeper into the stillness as she saw, within the widening rings, glimpses of things yet to come. Not precise moments, but feelings, impressions, the cry of a newborn, a hawk's shadow over grain fields, smoke rising gently from a hearth rebuilt after long absence. These were signs of renewal, of quiet endurance. She smiled faintly, her lips barely moving. Circle's pattern was clear. The land was turning toward a gentler season, but even within peace, there was shadow. She sensed another rhythm, one beneath the calm surface, the slow stirring of change. A river shifting its course, a boundary stone eroding, a decision yet unmade by those in the valley. Balance would hold, but not without care. The stones did not warn. They simply asked to be heard. When she opened her eyes again, the vision faded like mist under dawn. The moon hung steady overhead, and the hilltop returned to stillness. Her hand still rested against the stone, cool and solid, anchoring her between dream and waking. She whispered a word of thanks, not to a god, but to the presence that listened. Among the Celts, it was believed that stones had spirits, called genealoci by later tongues, guardians of place. Every circle had its own older than memory. To acknowledge it was to remain in harmony with both earth and time. On stepped back, her feet whispering through the grass. The shadows had shifted again, thinner now, as the moon began its slow descent toward the western ridge. In the dimming light, her cast pebbles shimmered faintly. She stooped and gathered them one by one, returning each to her pouch. With each stone, she murmured a phrase of gratitude, a small, private ritual of completion. When the last pebble was gone, she looked once more around the circle. The stones were silent now, merely shapes in moonlight. But to her, they were never only stoned. They were memory made visible, each one a keeper of 1,000 forgotten whispers. She turned her gaze to the horizon, where a faint pallor of dawn had begun to touch the edge of night. The air carried a new coolness, the first sign of morning. Call called once more from the forest below, softer this time, almost content. And on, the seer smiled. The ritual was complete, the balance held. And somewhere far beneath her feet, in the deep veins of the earth, the song of the stones continued, quiet, unending, eternal. The night was loosening its hold. The horizon began to pale, brushing silver across the edge of the sky. Mist gathered low over the valley, curling like smoke above the sleeping world. The moon, high in steady moments, before, now softened, its brightness dimming, its voice growing faint. The stones, which had glowed like pillars of light, began to darken again, returning to their natural gray. On stood in the heart of the circle, her cloak damp with dew. The wind that had danced so freely now moved softly, as though reluctant to disturb the hush that lingered. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the earth, slow, deep, even. For in this quiet hour between night and morning, the veil between worlds thinned for the last time before dawn, It was said among the old tribes that the final breath of night carried truth, a moment when whatever vision had come in shadow would settle fully into the seer's spirit. Une had learned to wait for that breath to hold still, eyes half closed, and listen, not with her ears, but with the still center of her being. So she waited. A wren's call was the first sound to return, high, delicate, almost like laughter. The tiny bird darted between the stones, its wings whispering against the still air. Ogham smiled. The Celts believed wrens to be sacred messengers. Druid, the druid's bird, symbols of wisdom and transformation. To see one at divination was a blessing, a quiet assurance that the spirits had heard. She knelt once more before the witness, the tallest of the stones, and pressed her palms against the cold surface. The rough texture caught on her skin. Tiny flakes of lichen brushed her fingertips. In that moment, she felt the faint hum again, the same pulse she had sensed in the night. It was slower now, deeper, like the fading echo of a drum. "Thank you," she whispered, her breath bogging faintly against the stone. The words were not prayer, but promise, a vow to keep the balance the stones had shown her, to carry their rhythm into waking life. From her pouch, she withdrew a small piece of carved wood, a charm etched with ogham symbols, meaning memory, earth, and peace. She placed it at the stone's base beside a pinch of ground herbs, mugwort, yarrow, and meadowsweet plants used since time beyond reckoning for clarity and vision. This, too, was part of the ritual, an offering of return, a gesture of harmony between giver and guide. Then, as the sky grew lighter, she rose. The landscape unfurled below her, soft hills washed in pale gold, rivers winding like ribbons of light, and beyond them the faint outlines of thatched roofs in the valley. Smoke curled from a few early hearths, and she knew that the first stirrings of day had begun. The Celts saw dawn as both ending and beginning, a sacred hinge where one world folded gently into another. For Alwyn, it was the moment when vision became memory, when what she had seen under moonlight would begin to take shape in her waking mind. She turned slowly, taking one last look at the circle. The stones stood silent, patient, unchanged. But to her, they no longer seemed cold. They were companions, guardians of rhythm, keepers of breath, and in their shadows, the voices of all who had come before still lingered faintly, like echoes in deep water. She began her descent down the hill. The grass brushed softly against her legs, the dew clinging to her boots in tiny silver drops. Each step felt lighter, as though the earth itself were exhaling. Below, the valley slowly awakened. The distant sound of cattle bells drifted upward, followed by the low murmur of a river moving through reeds. Somewhere a dog barked once, sharp and brief, and a woman's voice answered the simple rhythm of morning life, returning. As Ah neared the edge of the forest that framed the base of the hill, she paused to look back one final time. The circle was nearly hidden by the mist, its stones fading into the pale shimmer of dawn. But even unseen, she could still feel their quiet presence, the pull of the place, the pulse of its memory, steady and enduring. She knew she would return again when the moon next called her, for the circle was not a temple, not merely stone, but a dialogue between time and silence, a way of listening that kept the world in tune. And as she stepped beneath the shelter of the trees, the forest welcomed her with soft birdsong and the rustle of new leaves. The scent of damp earth rose around her, grounding her once more in the waking world. She felt no urgency, no longing, only calm. The quiet contentment of one who has looked into the heart of night and found peace waiting there. In her village, they would greet her as the seer once more, asking what she had seen, what the stones had whispered. And she would smile, speaking gently, carefully, for her words, like the stones, were measured by balance, not haste. Perhaps she would say that the harvest would be kind, that the rivers would swell in time but never flood, that the fields would yield enough to sustain, and not too much to tempt greed. And then, when the day grew long and the heat settled low over the valley, she would rest, sitting by her door, listening to the wind and the reeds and the laughter of children by the river. In such simple sounds, she would hear the same truth she had heard in the stones, that all things move in cycles. That peace is not the absence of change, but the soft rhythm between what comes and what goes. The Celts called this balance animin, the soul's breath, the pulse that connects body to earth, dream to waking, moonlight to dawn. And as On drifted into her quiet thoughts, her mind returned once more to that still silver circle on the hilltop, where shadows had spoken in silence, and the stones had remembered what time forgets. The day was rising now. Sunlight spilled gently through the trees, warm and golden, and the mist began to dissolve, carrying with it the last whisper of the moon's song. High above, the circle stood watching, silent, steadfast, its stones gleaming faintly in the light of morning. And though their voices were quiet now, their rhythm endured a heartbeat within the hills, waiting for night to fall once more. The story ends there, in the hush between breaths, where the listener's mind drifts softly toward stillness. Let the image of the hill linger, the cool air, the scent of grass, the ancient stones, bathed in the first gold of dawn. And as that image fades, let the world grow quiet again. Let your thoughts slow, your breathing deepen. The rhythm of the stones becomes your rhythm, steady, calm, and endless. Now, there is nothing more to see, nothing more to know, only peace, only rest. Sleep well, traveler of the quiet path. The stones will keep their watch until you wake again.